Natasha Pierce stood in front of the gleaming glass towers of Rothwell Industries, adjusting her navy blazer for what felt like the 100th time. The morning sun caught on the mirrored windows, throwing light across the city like a reminder that she was stepping into a world that had never belonged to her. At 22, she carried herself with quiet dignity, but her heart pounded against her ribs. This job was not just another position. It was the culmination of every late night spent studying in a cramped apartment, every shift her mother had worked cleaning offices so Natasha could focus on school, every whispered prayer for a better future. She had promised herself she would not let this chance slip away. Her reflection in the revolving glass doors showed a young woman who appeared calm, though her trembling fingers betrayed her nerves. Dark hair pulled neatly into a bun, brown eyes sharp with determination, simple makeup meant to hide exhaustion more than highlight beauty. She had borrowed her blazer from a thrift shop but pressed it carefully the night before, determined to look the part. Her heels clicked against the polished marble as she entered the lobby, where people moved with practiced urgency, their suits crisp, their steps confident. For a moment, Natasha felt like an imposter. Then she drew a steadying breath and reminded herself she belonged here because she had earned it. The elevator carried her to the 42nd floor, where the view of the city stretched endlessly in every direction. She paused, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sleek design, the quiet efficiency of assistants moving between offices. Everything about Rothwell Industries spoke of power and ambition, a place where only the strongest thrived. Natasha felt small, yet a spark of defiance flickered inside her. She would prove herself. When she was finally introduced to, Jonathan Rothwell, the man whose name commanded both respect and fear in business circles, she felt her breath catch. At 34, he carried himself with a presence that filled the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair just beginning to silver at the temples, he wore his tailored suit like armor. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, assessing her in the same way he might evaluate a new acquisition, measuring value, potential, and risk all at once. "Miss Pierce," he said, his voice deep, even, and controlled. It was the kind of tone that could quiet a boardroom without raising volume. Natasha extended her hand, determined to meet him with steady composure. Their handshake lasted only a moment longer than necessary, but it was long enough for her to feel the faint current of electricity travel up her arm. She kept her expression professional, though heat rose to her cheeks. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in displeasure but in curiosity, as though he had noticed something unusual and wasn't sure what to make of it. "I trust you'll find the work challenging but rewarding," he continued. "Thank you, Mr. Rothwell," she replied, her voice even though her heart raced. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." The exchange was brief, formal, and forgettable on the surface. Yet when Jonathan turned back toward his desk, Natasha noticed the faint hesitation in his movements, as if some part of him remained caught on the moment they had just shared. For him, it was strange. He was a man who lived surrounded by polished people, women with flawless beauty and well-practiced charm. But this young woman, with her quiet strength and unpretentious manner, felt different, understated, genuine. Natasha left his office with her professional mask still in place, though her palms tingled from the touch of his hand. She told herself it was nothing, just nerves and adrenaline. But deep inside, a question lingered. Why had it felt like the world had shifted, however slightly, in those few seconds? Neither of them could have known that what began with a handshake would soon unravel both of their lives in ways they could never imagine. The sound of hurried footsteps echoing across the sleek floor of Rothwell Industries. Natasha Pierce moved quickly, a leather folder clutched against her chest, her expression calm even though her heart beat faster than she wanted it to. It had been 3 weeks since she had joined as Jonathan Rothwell's executive secretary, and every day felt like a test of endurance. She had learned his routines, memorized his preferences, and adjusted to the unspoken rules of a man who lived behind walls of discipline and control. Yet even in her quiet diligence, she sensed his watchful eyes, noticing far more than he let on. That morning, Jonathan had summoned her into his office for a meeting with senior executives. The tension in the room was thick, older men in tailored suits shifting uneasily as Jonathan dissected their reports with precise questions and sharp analysis. Natasha moved silently, refilling glasses of water, adjusting the projector, handing over contracts at the exact moment he needed them. Not once did he have to ask. She had anticipated every detail, her presence as seamless as if she had worked beside him for years. When the meeting ended, Jonathan dismissed the others with a clipped thank you. But when Natasha turned to leave as well, his voice stopped her. "Miss Pierce?" he said evenly. "Stay a moment." She froze, then nodded, returning to her position in front of his desk. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes fixed on her. For the first time she felt stripped of her professional mask, as though he were reading past her calm surface into the truth she tried to hide. "You handled that well," he said finally. "Most new hires would have stumbled at least once under that pressure." Natasha met his gaze without flinching. "Thank you, sir. I only try to make things easier for you." Something in her tone made him pause. Most people sought favor with Jonathan Rothwell, eager to impress for their own gain. But Natasha spoke without calculation. Her words carried a simple honesty that unsettled him more than any boardroom challenge. That night, the city was drowning in rain and the office emptied early. Natasha stayed behind, reorganizing files and preparing documents for the next day. She moved quietly between shelves, unaware that Jonathan had remained in his corner office, watching her through the glass wall. Her hair had come loose from its bun, a dark strand falling against her cheek as she bent over her work. She tucked it behind her ear with an absent gesture, one so simple yet so intimate it pulled at him in ways he could not explain. At nearly midnight, he rose from his chair and walked to her desk. Natasha looked up, startled to find him standing there, his tie loosened and his expression unreadable. "You should go home," he said softly. "You have done enough for today." She shook her head with quiet determination. "These need to be ready for tomorrow. I want everything perfect for you." Her words struck him deeper than he expected. Perfection for him, not for her career, not for recognition. For him, for a man who had built his empire believing trust was a luxury he could never afford. This loyalty from a young woman with no agenda felt dangerous. He studied her face in the glow of her desk lamp, the shadows softening her features until she seemed almost untouchable. A flicker of something unspoken passed between them, and for one suspended moment the air felt charged as though the storm outside had broken into the room itself. Jonathan forced himself to step back, breaking the spell before it could shatter his carefully constructed walls. "Eat something before you collapse," he said more gruffly than he intended, then turned and left her with her papers and her racing heart. Natasha sat frozen, staring at the door long after it closed. She told herself it was nothing, only her imagination, only exhaustion. But deep down she knew the truth. Something had shifted tonight, something neither of them would be able to ignore much longer. The storm still raging outside the city. The glass walls of Rothwell Industries shivered under the relentless downpour, and flashes of lightning painted the skyline in harsh silver light. Inside the office, the hum of the fluorescent lamps was the only sound left, echoing through the vast empty floor except for the steady rhythm of Natasha's typing. She had refused to leave even when the last of the staff hurried home clutching umbrellas against the furious wind. Jonathan stood in his corner office staring out into the storm. His jacket was discarded, his tie loosened, and the sharp lines of his face were set in grim focus. He had spent days wrestling with an acquisition that seemed ready to collapse, and even for a man who thrived on impossible deals, the pressure weighed heavy on his shoulders. He rubbed at his temples, then turned, noticing the faint glow still burning from Natasha's desk. He crossed the quiet floor and stopped at the sight of her bent over a stack of contracts. Papers spread out in perfect order, her eyes narrowed in concentration. Her blouse was wrinkled from the long day, her hair slipping loose in soft strands. Yet there was a calm persistence in the way she worked, as if nothing in the world could pull her away. He found himself watching longer than he should until she finally looked up. "Mr. Rothwell," she said, surprised, her voice quiet against the storm. "I thought you had gone hours ago." "I could say the same for you," he replied, stepping closer. There was an edge of curiosity in his tone. "Why are you still here?" She hesitated, then answered with complete honesty. "Because I know how much this deal means to you. I wanted to make sure everything is perfect for tomorrow." Her sincerity unsettled him. The women who moved in his world often sought advantage or piao. raise, but Natasha spoke without ambition or calculation. It was loyalty untainted, and it pierced through the armor he wore so carefully. He moved closer until he stood beside her desk, studying the faint tremor in her hands from too much caffeine and too little food. "When did you last eat?" he asked sharply. "Lunch," she admitted, though it had been nearly 10 hours ago. Without another word, Jonathan turned into his private dining room and returned minutes later with a tray, soup and a sandwich set down before her with a gentleness that surprised them both. "Eat," he said softly. "I cannot have my secretary collapsing before the morning meeting." Natasha blinked at the gesture, her chest tightening. She picked up the spoon and began to eat each bite, chased by the weight of his eyes on her. She wanted to thank him, to tell him what it meant to be seen after weeks of invisible effort, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply offered him a small smile that reached her tired eyes. Jonathan felt something stir inside him, something dangerous. He told himself it was only exhaustion, only the intimacy of late hours and storm-filled silence. But when her lips curved around the spoon and she looked up at him with unguarded trust, he knew it was more. The storm outside raged, but it was nothing compared to the storm rising quietly between them. He leaned one hand on her desk, his presence overwhelming yet protective. "Natasha." He said her name, sounding different, softer, almost reverent. She froze the spoon halfway to her mouth, their eyes locking. The silence grew thick, charged with a tension neither could explain, and for one reckless moment he thought of leaning down, closing the distance, claiming the warmth he had denied himself for years. But he drew back, breaking the spell, his jaw tightening. "I will see you tomorrow, Miss Pierce. Get some rest." The words were cold, but his eyes betrayed him, lingering too long before he turned away. Natasha sat unmoving, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what had almost happened, and knew too that this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous than either of them was prepared for. The night of the annual Rothwell Industries Gala, a glittering event where power and wealth paraded under chandeliers of crystal and gold. Natasha had spent weeks preparing every detail of the evening, from the guest list to the color of the flowers. She moved through the ballroom in a simple black dress that clung to her in elegant restraint, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. For once, she was not the quiet secretary behind a desk. She was radiant, though she carried herself with the same modesty that had always defined her. Jonathan entered late, his presence commanding instant attention. Heads turned, conversations faltered, the weight of his reputation and fortune wrapping around him like an invisible cloak. He scanned the room with cool detachment, offering nods to board members and distant smiles to business partners. But his gaze caught on Natasha across the room, and for the first time all night his composure wavered. She was laughing softly at something one of the senior executives had said, the sound light and genuine. It struck Jonathan like an unexpected blow. There was no calculation in her smile, no performance for power, just her untouched warmth radiating in a room filled with masks. He realized with startling clarity that he had not truly taken his eyes off her since she had arrived. Later, as the evening waned, Jonathan found her alone on the terrace. The city stretched out beneath them, glittering with lights, while the echo of music drifted through the open doors. Natasha stood at the railing, the wind stirring her hair. Her expression was thoughtful, not the usual guarded professionalism. He stepped beside her, his voice low. "Successful evening," he said. She glanced at him, her eyes catching the glow of the city. "You looked happy tonight. It is good to see you relax." Her words unsettled him. They were not flattery or small talk. They were an observation, as if she had seen past the armor he wore to the man beneath. Jonathan studied her profile, her delicate features softened by moonlight. The silence grew thick, charged with something neither dared name. His hand lifted almost without thought, brushing against her cheek. She did not flinch. Instead, she leaned ever so slightly into his touch. Her eyes searched his, as if she too was caught between fear and longing. The kiss came like the breaking of a dam, months of suppressed desire surging free. His lips met hers with unexpected gentleness, reverent as if she were something precious. Her breath caught, then melted into him, her hands rising instinctively to his chest. When they pulled apart, both were trembling from the force of what had just happened. "I should apologize," Jonathan whispered, though he did not move away. "Should you?" she breathed back, her voice trembling with both fear and hope. Instead of answering, he kissed her again, this time deeper, hungrier, carrying the weight of everything he had denied himself. Their world narrowed to the heat of that moment, the dangerous thrill of crossing a line they could never retreat from. When he finally drew back, his forehead resting against hers, his voice was rough. "Natasha, I do not know what this means, but I know I cannot ignore it any longer." She closed her eyes, the truth pressing on her chest. "I cannot either." The city lights glowed around them, the night thick with promise and danger. Both of them knew nothing would be the same again, and yet neither could turn away from the fire they had just lit. The quiet aftermath of a storm that had been building between them for weeks, Jonathan and Natasha had crossed the line, and nothing about their world felt the same anymore. What had begun as a single kiss on the terrace became stolen moments behind locked doors, lingering touches in shadowed hallways, and whispered confessions when no one else could hear. In the days that followed, Jonathan found excuses to summon her into his office long after other staff had gone home. The meetings began with paperwork, but ended with his lips pressed to hers, their voices hushed as if the entire city outside might overhear. Natasha felt herself swept into a current stronger than she could control. Her heart told her this was love, the kind she had secretly dreamed of all her life, the kind that left her trembling in his arms, believing in a forever she had never dared hope for. One evening, the snow drifted softly against the windows of his penthouse. Natasha sat nervously on the edge of the leather sofa, her cheeks flushed with anticipation. Jonathan stood by the fire, his tie undone, his eyes dark with something more than desire. He crossed to her in 3 strides, his hand lifting her chin, forcing her gaze to meet his. This time there was no hesitation, no careful restraint. His kiss was urgent, hungry, the culmination of months of restraint snapping apart. Natasha's breath caught as his hands framed her face, her heart pounding with both fear and trust. She had never been with a man before, and though the world called Jonathan ruthless, he touched her as though she were glass. He undressed her slowly, reverently, worshipping her innocence with every kiss and caress. The firelight flickered across their skin, painting them in warmth and shadows. Natasha gave herself to him fully, her body trembling with the weight of her first surrender. When it was over, she lay in his arms, the soft sheets tangled around them. "Jonathan's voice broke the silence, rough yet tender. "You are mine now, Natasha. Not because you work for me, not because you gave yourself to me, but because I cannot imagine a world where you do not belong to me." She pressed her cheek to his chest, her heart swelling with emotion. "I love you, Jonathan. I want this to be you forever. For Jonathan." The words cut deeper than any deal or victory. He had built an empire by controlling risk, by avoiding vulnerability. Yet here was this young woman who had walked straight past his defenses with nothing but her quiet devotion. He held her tighter, whispering promises he had never dared speak to anyone before. But shadows were already forming around the edges of their secret happiness. For every tender word there lingered the danger of discovery. For every promise whispered in the night, there was the unspoken truth of how different their worlds truly were. Jonathan's reputation, his empire, his ruthless ambition stood like a wall between them. Natasha did not see it yet, her innocence shielding her from the storm that waited ahead. But Jonathan felt it pressing against his chest each time he looked into her trusting eyes. And still, when she drifted to sleep in his arms that night, he let himself believe in something he had long forgotten. He let himself believe in love, unaware that soon a single test, a pair of pink lines, would unravel everything they thought they had built, the faint light of dawn filtering through the blinds of Natasha's small apartment. The city outside was waking, but she sat frozen on the bathroom floor, her trembling hands clutching a thin plastic stick. The 2 pink lines glared back at her, a truth so undeniable it felt like the earth had shifted beneath her feet. She was pregnant. Jonathan's child grew inside her, a living reminder of a night that had been both tender and dangerous. Tears welled in her eyes as her hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. A rush of emotions collided inside her: joy, fear, disbelief. She thought of her mother who had raised her alone, working endless shifts so Natasha could dream of a better life. She thought of promises she had made to herself as a child, that if she ever had children, they would never grow up wondering if they were loved or wanted. Now the weight of that vow pressed down on her as heavy as stone. For 3 days, she carried the secret alone. She forced smiles at work, answered calls, scheduled Jonathan's meetings with her usual efficiency. But inside, her thoughts churned in endless circles. Every time Jonathan spoke her name, she wondered if he could sense the change. Every time he brushed past her in the hallway, her heart ached with the knowledge that she was carrying a part of him he did not yet know existed. Finally, on a Friday evening when the office was empty and the city lights glowed like fireflies against the glass, Natasha gathered her courage. Jonathan sat at his desk reviewing contracts, his tie loosened from another long day. She stepped forward, her palms damp, her throat tight. "Jonathan, I need to tell you something important." Her voice shook, and instantly he looked up, setting aside his pen. His gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that had always both unnerved and steadied her. "What is it, darling?" he asked, reaching for her hand. Her heart pounded. "I am pregnant." The words left her lips trembling in the air between them. Jonathan's expression went blank, the warmth draining from his features as though she had spoken a curse. The silence stretched unbearably long. Natasha's eyes searched his for any flicker of joy or hope, but there was nothing, only a cold stillness. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice carefully, measured. "I took 3 tests," she whispered. "I saw a doctor this morning. There is no mistake, Jonat." Han pulled his hand from hers slowly, as if distance could shield him from the truth. He stood and walked to the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the glittering city. When he turned back, the man she loved was gone. In his place stood the ruthless CEO whose decisions built empires and crushed rivals. "This is unfortunate timing," he said flatly. "The board is watching my every move. A scandal like this could destroy everything I have worked for." Natasha's stomach twisted. "A scandal? Is that what our love is to you? Is that what this baby is?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Be realistic. You are my secretary. The media would tear us apart. They would paint you as a gold digger and me as a fool. I will not allow it." Her heart cracked with every word. "I never wanted your money, Jonathan. I wanted you. I still want you. We can make this work. We love each other." His laugh was bitter. "Love. What we have is attraction, passion. It is not love. Love requires compatibility, shared worlds. You and I are too different." The cruelty of his dismissal stole her breath. She stared at him, stunned, unable to recognize the man before her. "I will pay for you to take care of the situation." He continued, his tone sharp. "You will have the best private clinic, complete discretion. When it is over, we will return to the way things were." Her hands flew protectively to her stomach, her voice rising with disbelief. "You want me to destroy our child?" He met her gaze with chilling detachment. "I want you to be practical. You are young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Why would you throw it away for this mistake?" Natasha rose slowly, her legs shaking, her eyes burning with tears, but her voice steady. "This baby is not a mistake, Jonathan. This is our child, born from love. Your cowardice is the only mistake in this room." His face hardened then. "If you keep this pregnancy, you do so alone. I will never acknowledge this child. I will not support you, Istao." "Have what you want." The threat cut deep into her soul. She thought of her own father's absence, the emptiness she had carried since childhood. But even as her heart broke, she knew she could not bend. "At least my child will know. Their mother loves them unconditionally," she whispered. "And that is more than some children ever get." She walked out of his office that night, her dignity intact, but her heart shattered into pieces she feared might never mend. The silence of Natasha's tiny apartment, where nights stretched endlessly and mornings brought waves of sickness that left her weak and exhausted. She moved through the days with a quiet determination, attending interviews that ended in polite rejection and returning home to balance bills that never seemed to stop. Her savings dwindled. Her body grew weaker, yet she refused to give in to despair. She whispered promises to the life inside her. "You will never feel unwanted. You will never be alone." One afternoon after another, failed interview, she stepped out of a medical building, clutching the results of her prenatal checkup. Her shoulders sagged beneath the weight of exhaustion and worry. She was so distracted that she collided with someone on the sidewalk, papers scattered across the pavement. Natasha bent to gather them, only to freeze when she looked up into the elegant face of Catherine Rothwell. Natasha, she said in surprise, her tone warm and gentle. What a coincidence, darling. Are you well? Natasha's lips parted, but no words came. Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them, and her hands shook. Catherine noticed the building behind them, the sign for obstetrics gleaming in the afternoon sun. Concern flashed in her eyes instantly. She guided Natasha to a nearby cafe, ordered tea and sandwiches, and waited quietly until the young woman's defenses broke. Between sobs, Natasha confessed everything. The secret romance, the pregnancy, Jonathan's cold rejection, the threats that had driven her out. Catherine listened, her expression shifting from disbelief to sorrow and finally to anger. When Natasha finished, she buried her face in her hands. I am so sorry, Mrs. Rothwell. I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted anything from him. Catherine reached across the table, taking her hand firmly. My dear girl, you have nothing to apologize for. The shame is not yours. It is my son's, and I will never forgive him for treating you this way. Natasha shook her head. I don't want anything from him. I just want to raise my baby with love and give her the life I never had. Catherine studied her closely, then smiled through tears. You are stronger than you know, Natasha, and you will not do this alone. This child is my grandchild, no matter what Jonathan believes. Please let me and Robert support you. At first, Natasha protested, but Catherine silenced her with a firmness that left no room for argument. This is not charity, she said. This is family, taking care of family. My husband and I have long dreamed of grandchildren, and though Jonathan has blinded himself with ambition, you have given us a gift we never thought we would see. We will stand by you. From that moment, Natasha's world began to change. Catherine attended every doctor's appointment, holding her hand during ultrasounds and crying when the steady heartbeat of the baby filled the room. Robert prepared a nursery in their home and insisted on weekly dinners, filling Natasha's quiet life with laughter and warmth. They treated her not as a mistake, but as a daughter of their hearts. For the first time in weeks, Natasha began to believe she and her baby might truly have a future. Yet in the quiet moments when she lay awake at night, one truth still haunted her. Jonathan had turned his back on them completely, and though she tried to forget the man who had broken her heart, she could not escape the knowledge that one day her child would. They'll ask about their father. She whispered into the darkness a promise to her unborn child. I will be enough for you. But deep inside, she feared the day when those words might not be true. On a gray September morning when rain lashed against the windows of the cottage Catherine had given Natasha, a dull ache had settled in Natasha's back for days, but this time it was sharper, deeper. She tried to move through her morning routine, but the pain grew stronger until it stole her breath. She clutched the edge of the counter, her heart pounding with both fear and instinct. The baby was coming too soon. Her hands shook as she dialed Catherine's number. Within minutes, Catherine arrived, her face pale but her voice steady. She helped Natasha into the car as another contraction ripped through her body. The drive to the hospital blurred into flashing lights, wet streets, and Catherine's voice urging her to breathe. Everything will be all right, darling. Hold on. We are almost there. Inside the delivery room, the doctors moved quickly, monitors beeping urgently. Dr. Martinez explained the situation with calm authority. The baby is early. We need to act fast. The child's heartbeat is strong, but we must be careful. Natasha's body shook with each contraction, sweat pouring down her forehead. She gripped Catherine's hand as waves of pain tore through her. I cannot do this, she gasped. You can, Catherine whispered fiercely. You are stronger than you know, and she is fighting to meet you. Hours dragged into the night. Every time Natasha thought she had no strength left, the sound of her baby's heartbeat pushed her forward. Then, without warning, the monitors began to shriek. The baby's heart rate dropped dangerously. The doctor barked orders. Prepare for emergency section, we are losing her. Panic filled the room. Natasha's world tilted. She clung to Catherine's hand, her eyes wide with terror. Please do not let anything happen to my baby. The medical team rushed her down the hall. Bright lights above blurred into one another. The air was thick with urgency and fear. Catherine never let go of her hand, whispering prayers and promises. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a cry pierced the sterile air, a tiny, desperate cry that echoed like salvation. Emma, Catherine Pierce, entered the world, small, fragile, but alive. Natasha sobbed as the nurses placed the bundle against her chest. The baby's skin was warm, her breaths shallow but steady. Natasha kissed her damp forehead, whispering, "Hello, my beautiful girl. Mommy loves you so much." Tears streamed down her cheeks as Emma's tiny fingers curled instinctively around her own. Catherine leaned over her eyes, wet with joy. "She is perfect, darling, the most beautiful granddaughter in the world." While Natasha recovered, Catherine made a call, her voice carrying steel. Jonathan answered with irritation, already prepared to dismiss her, but her words cut through his defenses like a blade. "Your daughter was born this morning." Jonathan fell silent, the weight of the truth crashing down. Catherine continued. "Natasha almost died bringing her into this world, but she fought and survived. The baby is small but strong, and she has your dark hair and your stubborn chin. You can pretend this does not matter to you, but she exists. She is flesh of your flesh, and she deserves more than a coward for a father." On the other end of the line, Jonathan said nothing, but his silence was not the silence of indifference. It was heavy, filled with something Catherine had rarely heard in her son before: fear. She pressed harder. "I am not asking you to marry Natasha or to play the hero. I am telling you to meet your daughter once. Then you decide the man you want to be." 3 days later, Jonathan stood outside the hospital door, his hand frozen on the handle. Inside, Natasha sat by the window, cradling the tiny bundle against her chest. The moment he stepped inside, his world tilted. Natasha looked up, her expression guarded but calm. Jonathan's eyes locked on the baby, and for the first time in years, he felt his heart falter. Emma stirred, opening her eyes wide and gray like his own. In that instant, the walls he had built his entire life began to crumble. Jonathan, sitting in the hard plastic chair beside Natasha's hospital bed, his gaze fixed on the tiny bundle in her arms. He had faced boardrooms filled with ruthless competitors, signed billion-dollar contracts under impossible deadlines, and crushed rivals without blinking. Yet, in this quiet room with the steady beep of monitors and the fragile breaths of his newborn daughter, he felt stripped bare. Emma's hand gripped his finger with astonishing strength. Her eyes opened briefly, gray like storm clouds, and unmistakably his. Jonathan's throat tightened. He had told himself for months that he was not capable of being a father. That responsibility would ruin him, the way it had ruined his own father. Yet here she was, small, helpless, and already undoing every lie he had told himself. Natasha watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. She had been through fire and survived alone, carrying the weight of rejection and betrayal. And now she was cautious, ready to shield her child from another wound. Jonathan finally broke the silence, his voice low and rough. "I was terrified. When you told me about the pregnancy, I thought only of how I would fail her, how I would fail you. I believed distance was safer than trying and breaking you both." He swallowed hard. "My father died working on a construction site because he thought providing was enough. I spent years blaming him for leaving me, and I swore I would never let anyone depend on me. But by running from you, I became worse than him. I abandoned you before I even tried." Natasha's eyes filled, but her voice was steady. "Forgiveness does not erase the past, Jonathan. If you want to be in her life, you have to prove you will stay. She cannot grow up wondering if her father will disappear whenever things get hard." Jonathan nodded solemnly. He understood these were not empty words. This was a test, a line drawn in stone. The days that followed became a trial by fire. Jonathan rearranged his schedule, forcing his empire to bend around his daughter instead of the other way around. He was there for midnight feedings, his large hands clumsy as he learned to cradle a bottle. He walked the floor at dawn, whispering to soothe her cries. He sat with Natasha in silence during the long nights when exhaustion nearly broke her. He did not simply visit, he showed up every single day. There were moments of tension. Natasha's mistrust still raw. Old wounds flared when he spoke too sharply or when business threatened to pull him away. But then she would see him kneeling on the floor playing with Emma. His face softened in ways she had never thought possible, and her defenses began to crack. Catherine and Robert watched with quiet satisfaction, knowing their son was finally learning the lessons they had long prayed for. Jonathan's transformation did not come overnight, but brick by brick he tore down the wall he had built around his heart. He signed papers formally acknowledging Emma as his heir. He created a trust fund for her future and ensured Natasha had every resource she needed. But more powerful than the wealth was his presence, the steady rhythm of a man determined to earn back what he had thrown away. One evening, Natasha stood in the cottage doorway watching Jonathan carry Emma on his shoulder, humming softly to calm her. The sight pierced her heart. He looked nothing like the ruthless CEO who had once dismissed her as a liability. In that moment, he looked like a father, like the man she had once believed he could be. And for the first time since her world had shattered, she let herself wonder if perhaps love could be reborn from the ashes on a quiet winter evening when snow drifted softly across the estate. The cottage was warm inside, filled with the faint crackle of the fireplace and the soft cooing of Emma on her blanket. Natasha sat on the floor beside her stacky, playing small, colorful toys while Jonathan leaned against the doorway watching them. The sight of the two people who had come to mean everything to him stirred something deep and unshakable in his chest. For months he had fought to prove himself not with words but with presence. He had shown up for every doctor's visit, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. He had stepped away from the endless race of business deals to discover a different kind of victory, the simple triumph of holding his daughter until she slept. Yet still he carried the weight of the question. Would Natasha ever trust him with her heart again? That evening, Emma gurgled happily, reaching for Jonathan. Her small hands waved until he crossed the room and scooped her into his arms. His expression softened, the hard lines of his face melting into something unrecognizable from the ruthless man who once ruled boardrooms. Natasha watched him with quiet intensity, her heart caught between past wounds and the undeniable truth of what stood before her. He was changing not with grand promises, but with small, consistent acts. When Emma drifted to sleep, Jonathan placed her gently in the crib and sat beside Natasha on the sofa. For a long time, they said nothing, the silence filled with memories of heartbreak and nights of rebuilding. Finally, Jonathan spoke, his voice low and unguarded. I know I destroyed us once. I know I do not deserve a second chance. But Natasha, I cannot pretend anymore. I do not want to be just the father of your child. I want to be the man who stands beside you every day of my life. Her breath caught. She had feared this moment, feared he might ask before she was ready. But the months of watching him change had worn down the last of her resistance. She thought of how he had once offered her money to erase their child and how now he would sacrifice empires just to rock Emma to sleep. She turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. If we try again, it cannot be like before. It cannot be passion without trust or promises without action. Our daughter deserves a love that endures. Jonathan reached for her hand, his grip firm and steady. Then let us build that love together. Not the desperate fire we had before, but something stronger, patient, lasting. I want to marry you, Natasha, not because of Emma, not because of guilt, but because I love you, and I want to spend my life proving it. The words hung between them, raw and powerful. Natasha felt the walls she had carried finally fall. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I will take that risk with you, Jonathan, not for Emma, not for appearances, but for us. The wedding came in spring beneath an arch of white flowers in the garden of the Rothwell estate. Catherine wept openly as she carried Emma down the aisle, the baby dressed in a gown that matched her mother's. Natasha walked toward Jonathan, her heart steady, her steps sure. This was not the timid secretary who had once trembled in his office, but a woman who had been broken and rebuilt stronger. As they exchanged vows, the world seemed to hold its breath. Jonathan's voice trembled as he promised not only to love Natasha, but to never again run from the weight of responsibility. Natasha promised not only to stand by him, but to keep reminding him that love was not weakness, but strength. Together they sealed a bond forged in heartbreak, tested by fire, and reborn into something unbreakable. Years later, their home echoed with the laughter of children. Emma grew into a bright, confident girl joined by twin brothers who filled the halls with chaos and joy. Jonathan balanced boardrooms with bedtime stories. Natasha pursued her dream of teaching literature. Their nights ended not in loneliness, but in quiet peace, watching the sun dip beyond the city that had once been a battleground for ambition. Now it was simply the place where they had found redemption. Sometimes when the house was quiet, Jonathan would ask, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had chosen differently from the start? Natasha would smile, resting her head on his shoulder. Everything happened the way it was meant to. We had to lose each other to learn how to truly love. And so the story that began with a virgin secretary trembling in the shadow of a millionaire ended with a family born from second chances and a love that endured against all odds.